I just did.
Welcome to those who just joined us. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you've got any questions during the presentation, please also post those in the chat. I will be compiling those for a question and answer session that will follow the presentation. We're going to give people a couple more minutes here to join, and then we will get started with the night's presentation. I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions, our normal intro slides here, so that we'll have plenty of time for Nat's presentation tonight. I want to start by reading the first part of the Water Advocates mission. Water Advocates mission is to advocate for a balanced, equitable, and resilient water future for all New Mexicans through public education and engagement and civic participation. Something the way we strive for in all of our endeavors, but especially here in our third Thursday speakers series workshops. We're glad to have you with us today. If you just joined us, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have any questions, please post those in the chat as I'll be compiling them for a question and answer session following the presentation. The Water Advocates' main activism areas are located on the traditional homelands of the Southern Tiwa, pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, San Felipe, Santa Ana, Sandia, and Isleta, the original people of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache. Since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our histories. Oh, history, singular. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Norm now to introduce our speaker for the night.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. I'm Norm Gom, president of the New Mexico Water Advocates, and we're delighted to be able to attract important topics and speakers to our third Thursday evening workshops. And I'm looking forward to hearing tonight from the Office of the State Engineer General Counsel, Nat I just went over this. Chakeres. Nat has a history with the agency. I believe he was an attorney for the Pecos River Bureau before his great talents were recognized and he was promoted to the general counsel position. And I think he's a real asset for New Mexico, as I think you'll conclude when you listen to him as well. I have a little story to tell about the topic tonight to introduce Nat's topic. I was appointed director of the Interstate Stream Commission in 1997, and State Engineer Tom Turney told me that my highest priority assignment was to determine how New Mexico could comply on a continuous basis with the Pecos River Compact. That was 10 years after the Supreme Court had ruled that New Mexico must never again owe water to Texas. We'd been buying water and leasing it, and we were kind of at our last straws and on the verge of non-compliance with that decree. And after I became familiar with the situation, I told Tom, I told the state engineer and others that I thought I was working on the third most important compact compliance problem in New Mexico. The Pecos was urgent, um, with relatively smaller stakes compared to the Rio Grande. I viewed the lower Rio Grande disputes as second in priority, and the Middle Rio Grande as first. And I think that not only do those increase in importance with regard to the economy and the number of people who are affected, but also with regard to the difficulty of the issues to settle. At any rate, Nat's going to talk to us about how the state engineer's plans to deal with overuse of water in the Middle Rio Grande that's threatening our compact compliance right now will be addressed. This is a follow-up to Nat's great presentation, almost a little bit short of 1 year ago today. So this is Carrots and Sticks for Compact Compliance, Part 2. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you, Norm, and thank you, Brittany, and thank you, everyone. I am excited to be here talking. I know there's a lot of folks who have been working on some of these issues a lot longer than me who are listening. So I am looking forward to the question and answer period, and I think there's going to be some great opportunities for engagement. I am going to put my slide deck up here. So if you want to bear with me for just a moment. Will I get that up and in presentation mode? Okay.
That looks great.
Thank you. So as Norm indicated, last year I gave a presentation titled "The Carrots and Sticks for Achieving Interstate Compact Compliance." And what I went through in that presentation was sort of the nuts and bolts of how I viewed the state engineer's authority under state law, including the active water resource management regulations and statutes. And I've included again all of that stuff in this slide deck so that you can, look at that if you so want. But I'm going to focus today somewhat more on the actual problems as we see them in the Middle Rio Grande, and what I think are going to be the main places of emphasis for our office to try to address the issues. And in the course of doing that, I'm going to be touching on some of the other major issues around the state, including, as Norm indicated, what was done on the Pecos, the Lower Rio Grande. I'm probably going to talk a little bit about what we're facing right now on the Colorado River. And the reason for doing those things is not to give in-depth talks on those areas. We don't have the time for all of that, but to sort of give examples of places where we either have or haven't addressed and tackled our water use issues, getting ahead of them or sort of waiting for events and litigation to overtake us. So that's what that's what I'm planning to do today, and I'm looking forward to, again, the questions, so I'll try to leave plenty of time for that. I'm just starting with some slides that, again, we had gone over last time, and it's stuff that you've all heard. We're looking at a water future that, we're living in the sort of the future that's been projected now, but significantly less snowpack, along with significant stress to mountain forests, more violent rainstorms at lower elevations, and more, even at similar levels of precipitation, more evapotranspiration due to higher temperatures. These are some graphics from the state's what we call leap ahead analysis. The source is at the bottom there, and I have a link to it here in the slide deck. Brown on this map means projected change in water stress by the middle of the 21st century. As you can see, New Mexico is one of the primary states in the country that's going to increase in terms of its water stress. This is some modeling done about potential flows at the Ottawa gauge, which is the beginning of the Middle Rio Grande. And so from the 1960s up to the early 2000s, that's based on actual data. And then we can see, based on different carbon emission scenarios going forward, what the flows will be up to 2100. And regardless of the scenarios, even some that are pretty optimistic about future precipitation, we're going to see a downward trend. And in the worst scenarios, a really scary downward trend. These are some figures that NOAA recently put together about the water situation we're in right now, today. Now, just to explain this graph, they have ranked 130 years of precipitation history for various sectors of New Mexico. And this year, for the Middle Rio Grande, we are first in the driest precipitation. Now, this was put together before the rains of last week. Those were nice. They didn't, or I'm sorry, the week before last, they didn't significantly change the picture. Again, now, ranking years from 1 to 130 in terms of average temperature. And with high numbers being warmer, we are in the Middle Rio Grande anywhere from 119th out of 130 to 129th. That's not good. This has been very, very, very hot and very, very, very dry this year. And the temperature, at least, looks like it's going to continue to be hot. We are looking like we're going to be significantly above average for temperature, at least for the next several months. And this graph, I'm sorry, it's a little bit difficult to read because there's a lot of different data on here. The precipitation outlooks going into the future actually don't look as bad. So these charts sort of progress outwards month by month from sort of June, July, August forward to July, August, September, etc. And of course, the further out we get, the more uncertainty there is, and we have to keep that in mind when we look at these projections. But certainly in the July, August, September seasonal precipitation outlook, most of New Mexico's looking like it's got a better chance of being an above average precipitation scenario than below. Now, again, there's significant error bars around this, but we're hopeful that we get some monsoon rains in the summer here because we're going to need them. And let me explain this graph. I think this is something that Norm and others have talked about in a number of contexts. And this graph is meant to be a graphical depiction of the water that New Mexico is allowed to use under Article 4 of the Rio Grande Compact in the Middle Rio Grande. So the horizontal axis, the x-axis, is annual inflow at the Otoe gauge. The Otoe gauge is right where the bridge crosses the Rio Grande on the road from Santa Fe up to Los Alamos. And that's the Otoe Bridge. There's a celebrated book about the house at Otoe Bridge. That is the fundamental compact gauge for New Mexico. And the amount of water that we're allowed to use and the amount of water we are obligated to deliver is directly traced to the flows at that index. Now, you can see that we're basically, have a 45-degree angle line to account for all of the water with the flows at Otoe. So, the diagonal line, 200 corresponds to 200, 400 to 400, 600, 600, etc. That just means that, that diagonal line is reflecting the total amount of water that came in to the system. The orange is the amount of water that is allowed to be consumed that does not need to be delivered to the Elephant Butte Reservoir. And the blue is the amount of water that must be delivered to the Elephant Butte Reservoir. And you can see that at very low inflow years, say below 600,000 acre feet, there's, some splitting about, some percentage, near half goes to Elephant Butte, and its remainder can be used within the Middle Rio Grande. As we get to larger inflow years, all of the water, all of the additional marginal inflows need to be going to Elephant Butte. Um, the Rio Grande Compact caps the proportion of the inflows that can be used in the Middle Rio Grande at 405,000 acre feet. Now, that doesn't mean that New Mexico can't consume more than that in the Middle Rio Grande, but we have to consume any excess of that out of rain tributary inflows that may have come into the system downstream of the Odawa Index. So rain and snow in the Jemez Mountains, for example. The Jemez River flows into the Rio Grande below the Odawa gauge. So big precipitation events in the Jemez River are really good for us for compact purposes. There are also other tributaries that come off of the western side of the Jemez, including the Rio Salado, and I'm blanking on the name of the other major inflow. Those aren't perennial streams, but if we have large flow events, those can sometimes get a fair amount of water into the Rio Grande, easing the impact on the Middle Rio Grande. But 405,000 acre feet is actually not a ton of water. So when we don't get those inflows, it's a pretty significant constraint on water use in New Mexico. This doesn't differentiate out who can use this water or whether even this water is used by humans. If it's consumed by the bosque and evapotranspirated, that still counts all the same. All we look at is the deliveries into Elephant Butte for a set formula that the Compact Commission has agreed on. This also doesn't differentiate between water used by senior water users, by junior water users, by prior empowerment time immemorial senior Pueblo users. The Compact views all of that water use equivalently. So we have to stay within a water budget effectively every year under the Compact. And this is how we've done over time. It's been a mixed bag. Every year here has its own bar. And some years we've had severe under deliveries, severe. And back in the late 1940s and 1950s, under deliveries in excess of 100,000 acre feet per year. That's an astounding figure to me. Some years we've had massive over deliveries. So there have been a couple of years where we've been at or near 150,000 in over delivery. Some of this has to do with just the flashy nature of the system. If you get big rain events in certain years, you're gonna potentially deliver a few tens of thousands of acre feet from those great rain events. Wonderful. Other years it just might not come, and it might be super dry, and we under deliver. The cumulative departures is really what we have to worry about in terms of compact compliance. So this is essentially the annual running sum of these bar graphs is in this chart. And you can see that in the 1950s, those terrible years of under deliveries drove us into a massive negative departure under the Compact. Texas attempted to sue New Mexico under the Compact. Well, that eventually didn't go anywhere. We were in violation of the Rio Grande Compact in the 1950s. I don't think anybody would dispute that. And we climbed out of it, and I'll talk a little bit about how we climbed out of that in a moment. But into the 1970s and 1980s, we had a pretty good run. We had a moment in the early 1980s where we had sort of a scary dip close to coming out of compliance. But then, into the 1990s and early 2000s, we were running significant positive departures. And even as recently as 2018, New Mexico was at a net, essentially zero departure under the Rio Grande Compact. That's a great place to be. It means that New Mexico users are using the water that they're entitled to, and it means that Elephant Butte is getting the water that it's entitled to. Since 2018, we have had a pretty serious negative trend. And you will see now that after 2024, we will carry a net debit of 124,000 acre feet of water. That's not a great situation for a couple of reasons. First, the red line indicates 200,000 acre feet of net debit. The compact spells out if our cumulative deliveries fall below that negative 200,000 acre foot line, we are in violation of the compact. The compact itself does not spell out the specific remedy for that, but it's, we can no longer litigate that we're not in violation. We are in violation if we ever cross that. The other reason why it's not good to be in debit is it imposes restrictions on New Mexicans from storing water in certain upstream reservoirs. I'm not going to go into details about those the way storage is managed under the compact in New Mexico. It's complicated. It's not really the upshot of what I wanted to talk about today. But New Mexicans have a built-in incentive to stay above the zero line so that they can store. It's easier for them to store water under various scenarios, and we certainly need to stay above the red line, because if we don't, we're in violation, and there's the possibility of legally, judicially imposed remedies on New Mexico if we're not able to adhere to that. To put it another way, if the next 7 years our compact performance is the same as the last 7 years, we will be in that violation status. And that's a very scary place to be. Now, what are we going to do? Like, have we ever been in this situation before? And as Norm alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, we have the Pecos River. We've in 1987 had a Supreme Court decree that found that New Mexico had underdelivered water to Texas over the course of 3 decades to the tune of 340,000 acre feet total. And we had a very draconian decree imposed on us in 1987 that we struggled for almost 20 years to find a lasting solution to. And as Norm alluded to, one of the great achievements of, I think, the Interstate Stream Commission and the Office of the State Engineer in the era of when Norm was at the Interstate Stream Commission was we reached what was called the 2003 Pecos Settlement Agreement that has given New Mexico a lasting solution to our compact woes. It hasn't solved all the water problems on the Pecos River, but it solved the compact problem, which in my view was the biggest problem. The Lower Rio Grande, we've got an obligation under the Rio Grande Compact not only to deliver water into Elephant Butte, but to ensure that Texas's apportionment gets to Texas. The compact doesn't say much at all about that, and so Texas initiated litigation in 2013. This is the Texas v. New Mexico case that's been in the news a lot since then. And Texas was alleging that because of groundwater pumping in the Lower Rio Grande, not enough water was getting to Texas out of Elephant Butte. The United States moved to intervene in that litigation in 2015 with a related claim saying that the United States was not able to fulfill its duties as a member of the Rio Grande project because its project deliveries were being interfered with excess groundwater pumping. And all of these suits were really the culmination of decades of tensions over water management and water use in the Lower Rio Grande, both in New Mexico and in Texas. I'm happy to announce, it's been in the news, that we, this week, have reached a settlement in principle. We've signed a term sheet with the major parties to that, well, all the parties to the litigation, as well as both irrigation districts involved, EBID and EP1. But that, and we'll be putting together the settlement documents over the next several months, and then I'll be able to talk more once those things become public about the specifics of what those settlements are going to hold. But Suffice to say that we got to that point only after a long period of litigation where we're spending tens of millions of dollars on lawyers. It wasn't a great sort of problem-solving model where have the parties fight in court for many years before you reach a settlement resolution. We have various Pueblo water rights settlements that we've reached in northern New Mexico that, again, we only reached them after a very long period of difficult litigation. So the Amit settlement is one of the more famous ones, but we also have the Rio San Jose settlement, the Jemez River settlement, which we've just reached in the past several years. And those were preceded by decades of difficult litigation in the adjudications of the water rights of both of those pueblos and the other parties in those basins. Not a great model for proactively dealing with problems is the litigate first model. On the brighter side, we have some examples around the state where we have been more proactive about some of our problems. So some of our tribal settlements have come about without this extensive litigation. So the Navajo Nation is probably, in my mind, the most impressive. We were able to settle the water rights claims of the Navajo Nation in a very comprehensive manner without really having the back and forth of litigation before doing that. In Taos Pueblo, there was some litigation in the adjudication there, but that was actually the first Indian water rights settlement that we reached, and it was really a groundbreaking settlement that had a lot of parties who were willing to work on a settlement rather than try and duke it out in court first. Some of you have probably heard from LaDonna Clayton. I think she gave a presentation this morning actually at the Water Dialogue. This is a much more modest scale project that she's working on, but the high plains in eastern New Mexico are very water stressed. The Ogallala Aquifer is not recharging at the rate necessary to support the amount of withdrawals from the aquifer, both in New Mexico and in the other states that the aquifer underlies. And Dr. Clayton, along with a number of other really visionary folks in Curry County, have proactively been trying to implement a conservation program. Not trying, they have been implementing a conservation program that's going to go a long way to keeping the aquifer, at least that portion of the aquifer, sustainable for a longer period of time for folks in the Curry County region. So we can solve our problems without shooting ourselves in the foot, I think. But the critical elements for being able to do that, in my mind, one, all the significant parties need to have a common understanding of the hydrological and the legal consequences of inaction. If we all know where the road of inaction goes, we can plan for an alternative. In sort of mediation and settlement facilitation speak, they have a really catchy nickname for this, and that's called BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And in most of these cases, for most water users, the alternative to negotiated agreements are pretty bad. And so once we get everybody on the same page about those understandings, we can make some real progress. But if people don't recognize that the alternative to negotiated agreed solutions is worse for them, they're not going to have any incentive to really roll up their sleeves and start to work. Another critical element, honestly, is sort of a human element. Stakeholders having mutual respect and being willing to engage and understand the needs of others. I think, the Middle Rio Grande, the Lower Rio Grande, I'm really happy that we reached a settlement, and it's got elements that had been talked about for a number of years. I think there were some real feelings of mistrust based on historical grievances and frankly litigation that had happened, where somebody would put something on the table that was an eminently reasonable proposal, and the party on the other side of the table would spend all their time trying to figure out where the trap was, where the trick was. Well, are they doing this just to trick us? And I'm really glad that we were able to get over that, but it made it a lot harder to reach a settlement because we had to build that mutual respect from a place where it wasn't in a great place when the litigation was sort of raging a decade ago. And then, you have policymakers being unafraid to take decisive action. The Middle Rio Grande, for a long time, I've been at the Office of the State Engineer since 2018. I was started at the Interstate Stream Commission, actually, but I was researching sort of what our history has been. And for a long time, some folks in our office had tried to, avoid some of the hard decisions, saying, well, we can't administer water rights until we have an adjudication. And we're never going to adjudicate the Middle Rio Grande because it's too difficult. It's too politically sensitive. How on earth are we going to handle all the pueblos, et cetera? That's not really to me, the way we're going to get out of a problem is, well, I don't want it to fail on my watch kind of attitude. So what the current state engineer, current Interstate Stream Commission, current governor want to do is we actually want to be proactive and try to take decisive actions. Even if we're not going to solve all the problems today, we can do everything we can to put us in the best position to get those problems solved as fast as we can. I don't blame those prior policymakers for identifying politically challenging problems and trying not to get, sunk by them, but it doesn't solve the problems, is all I'm saying. In the Middle Rio Grande, what do we need to do in terms of next steps to address what, I just laid out as a pretty scary, compact situation? First, we need to have a somewhat better hydrologic understanding of why we've done so poorly in the past 7 years as compared to other years. There's a number of good, I'd say hypotheses, but we weren't really actively managing this basin prior to 2018. And we were still able to kind of, make the water budget balance enough of the time during that period. What's changing? The big factors, of course, climate change, evapotranspiration is increasing. I think that there's a lot of concerns about how water is flowing or not flowing towards Elephant Butte at the bottom end of the Santa Casia Reach. So the Middle Rio Grande is broken up into various reaches, the lower Santa Casia Reach being the bottom part closest to Elephant Butte. And when we look at how much flow is coming into that reach versus how much flow is coming out, it's degraded significantly. There's probably, human reasons and non-human reasons for that, but we really want to tackle that. We also want to look more closely at how groundwater is being used. We don't have a metering order right now in the Middle Rio Grande, which when I tell people in the Pecos and the Lower Rio Grande that, they just sort of, they mutter expletives and say, how dare you, we did one really good thing in the Middle Rio Grande. In 1956, we said no new wells could be drilled aside from domestic wells, which I'll get to in a minute, unless there's a surface offset with a senior surface water right that's retired to offset the effects on the surface flows, because all of these wells are tapping into a large alluvial aquifer that's going to eventually have a one-for-one impact on the river. And there was a lot of consternation from the large commercial interests that wanted to see Albuquerque's growth in the 1950s. But the state engineer stuck his neck out and won that fight. And it's been documented in various stories and histories. I think M. Hall wrote some nice law review articles about it. And it's true. So part of the problem of the Lower Grande is we didn't start trying to regulate groundwater use until 1980. By that point, there were a lot of big wells that were coming online where there were no offsets. In the Middle Rio Grande, there's some pre-basin wells, but not as many. But I think there's part of the issue we're going to have to tackle is we don't have a comprehensive handle on how much water is being withdrawn from the wells, because the only ones that are on meters right now are the folks who've come to us, say in the past several decades, to re-drill their well or to change the place or purpose of use or point of diversion, where we've gotten a meter condition on them, we need to get meters on all of the major wells, and major meaning everything other than single-use domestic. And really, see what we're dealing with. A lot of folks think that domestic wells might be a bigger part of the problem than is otherwise thought. I'm not sure if that's if that's actually is large an issue, but we're studying whether we can quantify the impact of domestic wells. I will say that the administrative burden of metering every domestic well is enormous. I would rather our limited staff sort of take higher impact actions, but I also want to make sure that if too many domestic wells are really a significant part of the problem, we need to address those appropriately. But we're going to be doing a metering order in the Middle Rio Grande within the next year. Right now we have a contractor engaged to sort of identify the universe of unmetered wells, so that we can make sure that those folks receive notice. But we are going to be doing a metering order. It's something we did 20 years ago in the Lower Rio Grande. It's something we did even longer ago than that in the Pecos. And that's part of trying to put together the whole picture of what's going on. I had mentioned earlier that there was an attitude that we expressed for a long time that we'll never adjudicate the Middle Rio Grande. It's too hard. It's too scary. That's not, again, really a good way to tackle a problem. And so we've been communicating with all of the major water users, and we're going to be expanding that outwards. An adjudication is coming. What we're going to be starting with is likely again looking at MRGCD, and sort of its water rights are handled differently than any other water rights in the state based on the law that created MRGCD. But we're going to be sitting down with them. We're going to be sitting down with the Pueblos and looking at these large water rights and seeing if we can't get to a quantification about the amount of water that MRGCD can divert and deliver, and then work outwards from there in terms of the groundwater rights and the other major rights. So that's going to be coming. It's not going to happen overnight. I have some ideas about how we can do our adjudication in the Middle Rio Grande faster than has been done in other basins. Frankly, I think if parties have other avenues to sort of collectively and collaboratively solve our water management issues, I think that the adjudication may not be the proxy battlefield for those things that it's been in other places. So, for example, in the Lower Rio Grande and in the Pecos, the adjudication court was where people were fighting over putting in place a metering order, or fighting over all sorts of other issues that aren't strictly about quantifying the elements of every water user's water rate. If we just keep the adjudication in its lane about just defining the elements of people's water rights, as opposed to the separate issue of how the state engineer is going to administer based on the results of the adjudication, I think we can make a lot better progress in an adjudication than has previously been assumed. Another major plank here we have, it's last on this list, but it's certainly not last at all in the order of priority, is have a robust water planning process. Again, if we have that sort of a forum for planning for our water future, for discussing issues of administration, of other things, we don't have to fight about them in the adjudication. I don't think that, people are going to be able to give up a whole lot in a negotiation, again, unless they see the negative consequences in litigation of them not negotiating, as I said before. But assuming that's made clear, there's no reason why dedicated folks in a water planning process can't make great progress towards coming up with a water future plan that actually keeps us within our means. What are those plans going to include? I don't pretend to have to prejudge the answers to that. I will say that for the Middle Rio Grande, no one solution is going to solve everything. We have a lot of demands on water that are not going anywhere, and that we don't want to just sort of leave completely lost in this whole process. These include an environmental demand for endangered species management, as well as keeping the significant environmental and recreational values that everybody in the Middle Rio Grande holds to see, a healthy river. We have our water rights holders. Senior most are the 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos, but also we have a number of very senior water rights within MRGCD of irrigators. They represent a way of life and a cultural and economic value that our state isn't willing to just sort of, or is also legally can't just sort of disregard. We have the largest city, the largest urban area by far in the state that over the past decade or so has taken pretty significant strides towards water conservation, but still has huge water needs. And those, it's going to want the water for future economic development. And I should say also about our irrigators, I think the MRGCD has taken some significant strides in the past decade as well, in terms of keeping their system metered, in terms of, themselves looking at where water's going, ensuring that they're being responsible with respect to environmental needs as well. And then we, potentially are facing the need for getting all our water into Elephant Butte to ensure that the Lower Rio Grande and Texas have sufficient supply that their Rio Grande project is not frustrated. So there's a lot of demands on this river. None of them are going away. They're all legitimate. They all have some different legal hooks and equitable hooks. And we're only gonna get there if we put everything on the table. Priority administration is harsh. This was really the theme of what I talked about in my last presentation. It was set up in the 19th century really for irrigation and mining type uses where there weren't urban hard demand. If farmers who were farming cotton didn't get water one year, they just didn't plant. If a miner didn't have the flow they needed to do their mining operations, they would just stop their mining operations, and that would be that. We can't do that for hospitals, for schools, for cities. And frankly, also, priority administration wasn't set up for a system where we had pueblos that had prior and paramount rights. They fit nicely in there as the seniors in terms of their outcomes, but it's a very harsh binary I win, you lose type of administration. That doesn't mean we ignore it. On a number of stream systems around the state, we actively administer by priority every year. In Northeast New Mexico, around the Cimarron area, we're doing priority administration every year. The Mimbres River in Southwest New Mexico, the Chama River and its tributaries, we are glad that the users there have been embarking on adhering to a shortage sharing agreement. There's been some growth and change in terms of what that shortage sharing agreement looks like over the past 5 years. But in general, we're curtailing juniors, and it's only by the grace of the senior most water users on that system, Okeowenge, and several acequias that have priority dates dating back to about the year 1600, that any of those other users get any use of water at all. So priority administration is a part of the solution, and any solution certainly must honor priorities. But just strict priority administration when you're talking about the largest urban area doesn't really work well. It also doesn't work at all with sort of the Endangered Species Act. So that alone isn't, it's an alternative to a negotiated agreement that'll leave a lot of parties really without their needs met at all. Compensated buyouts of water rights. Now, these are parts of solutions that have been used on the Pecos River, and it's going to be it's not, I don't think, confidential to say, it's going to be part of the solution in the Lower Rio Grande. The state of New Mexico, if we have too many people who have valid water rights that are utilizing water, one way of reining in that use is for the state to put forward money to compensate people who no longer want to use water and who are willing to be bought out. Some people complain that that sort of rewards sort of laxity on the part of the state for allowing those water uses to flourish in the first place. I don't see it that way. I think it's a fairer way of bringing our water uses back within balance for those people who still want to use water. But those buyouts are also really expensive. We're not going to be able to buy our way out of every problem. I don't think it's going to be as big of a great solution in the Middle Rio Grande as it has been in some other places. But that remains to be seen. We're somewhat farther out from determining that than we are in some of our other basins. There are also externalities. So on the Pecos, the state purchased on the order of 10,000 acres of farmland from various areas. And there are some very small farming communities in the Roswell Basin that once you reach a tipping point of enough farms selling out, you can get just communities that really suffer and can die. We don't want to see that anywhere else. I think we've learned that lesson from the Pecos. We're not going to be, we're going to be more mindful of sort of these types of externalities, but they're real problems and they're real limits on just our ability to be buying out of water issues. There are also externalities related to land management. So on the Pecos River, we were originally required to purchase the land along with the water rights. The water rights had been appurtenant to, and I think that a big part of the reason for that was some of the policymakers weren't sure that that people would actually stop using water if they still owned the land. The Interstate Stream Commission is not a sort of a range management agency. They were not well equipped at all to manage these tracts covering, again, thousands of acres that were spread out from north of Roswell to Carlsbad, and there were weed problems, there were dust problems. Ultimately, the state legislature reversed itself and allowed us to sell that land to other folks who can, potentially graze there, or in parts of the region that were close to municipalities, they were able to put houses on them. But that was an externality. And finally, the state isn't going to have bumper surplus budgets every year. We already have seen a drop in oil prices this year from what they've been the past few years. And oil prices are actually below what our Legislative Finance Committee sort of likes to use as to set next year's budget. So if we face a budget downturn in New Mexico, it could be a lot harder to get the money for significant buyouts of water rights. Now, if the water situation gets bad enough, the price of the water rights might go down. But again, that's sort of you're cleaning up after the problem has struck if you're doing that. There's also a question of infrastructure projects and additional sources of supply, but those aren't those. I want to say unequivocally, those are not also the sole solution to our problems. In the 1950s, you may recall, I'll go back to this graph, when we were back in this big hole in the 1950s on our Rio Grande compact deliveries, the Bureau of Reclamation went out and they spent a lot of money, and they basically built what they called the low flow conveyance channel. And it was a channel in that lower Santa Casia reach to deliver water more efficiently to Elephant Butte. They were doing it with a typical mid-20th century engineering mindset. It was not the sort of thing that you would do to sort of ensure maximum environmental benefits, but it was a big part of the solution. It got water more efficiently to Elephant Butte. The river itself, I like to say, it doesn't care about getting to Elephant Butte or this or that. The river, before sort of MRGCD went into place. It was an abraded channel. There was a lot of sediment deposited in extremely inconvenient places. That's, that's nature. Nature is the river is going to change and move and do whatever the river is going to do. If we want to maintain existing uses of water, which I will say that is a mission of our office, is to ensure that lawful uses of water are able to continue. We need to maintain the river in a way that's not just letting nature do its thing. And I hear, and I'm very sympathetic to people who say, well, that there's a lot of hubris to that. The river itself should be able to act like a river. I think that a lot of us feel that there's a lot of wisdom in those statements. The fact remains, if we want to remain in legal compliance with the Rio Grande Compact and maintain water uses as they've been used in some capacity, we need to maintain the performance of the river in the way that the people who drafted the compact were expecting it to perform. And if that means utilizing some channelization of the river, that's going to be probably part of the solution. Do we want to do it with a disregard for environmental benefits? Absolutely not. But it's probably a pretty significant chunk of water savings that can be had with just making sure that our low flow conveyance channel under certain conditions operates the way it was intended to, which is to get some water to Elephant Butte at those times it needs to. Another topic that's been discussed a lot sort of in the legislature and other venues is tapping into sources like brackish water. We passed a bill that creates the strategic water supply, and we now have a fund of money to help fund some projects to get some additional brackish water. That water, I think it's clear to everybody, is going to be expensive water. Treating brackish water is never cheap. There is brackish water out there, but it's not going to be cost effective for that to be used for agriculture, which is the large majority of the water use that we have. Likewise, it's not going to be able to be, running the ticker in the tens and hundreds of thousands of acre feet that we need to see in terms of counterbalancing increased evapotranspiration from climate change. What it can do is provide an additional source of supply for economic development, for commercial users who are able to spend more money for water than agricultural uses. So that's a part of the solution. It's gotten a lot of attention. I think some folks have thought that it maybe has gotten too much attention and is distracting us from some of the other solutions we need to see. But that may be true, but it's got to be on the table. I think another, though, great solution is we're just going to have negotiated resolutions where there's parties under certain circumstances are going to take less water. I talked already about the Albuquerque-Bernalillo Water Utility Authority taking some pretty proactive water conservation steps in the past decade. MRGCD really moving in the same direction. We're going to need more of that. All of our major water users are going to need to find ways where they can reduce their depletions. That's the low-hanging fruit. And then once we see where we can get to with some of that, we're going to have to figure out, okay, in those terrible supply years where we might have extremely low San Juan Chama supply, and we're getting close to compact violation status, what is our plan for who's gonna take the cuts in those time periods? There might need to be more temporary use of groundwater than surface water in certain periods, but that doesn't provide a net benefit to long-term water solutions, but it could help us in individual years under the compact. And we want to get into the place where we have all of those plans worked out. Our office, it's probably going to be next week, is going to be sending a letter to all the major water users who use over 250 acres of water per year, acre feet of water per year in the Middle Rio Grande, sort of letting them know, look, we've already been in contact with MRCD. We're engaging with the Pueblos about, sort of our water future. We're going to be starting this conversation with you. This is an imperative. It's not something that's going to go away with time. We're going to have to be really smart and really pretty focused about what water depletions we want in the Middle Rio Grande, and then what are we willing to do to ensure those. And again, that's going to involve probably all of these above solutions. One of the other things I didn't include here is sort of importation from other basins. The San Juan Chama water is all spoken for. There's been some schemes to import water from other basins. I would say, as currently formulated, I'm not optimistic that those schemes would be able to make a significant dent in our water future. We're not against trans-basin water transfers as a rule. I know some people they're sort of inherently opposed to them. They think they're unfair. I see those points, but at the same time, I think that sometimes they're a real lifesaver. Again, I think some of our office is on record in the litigation against the Augustine Plains transfers currently formulated for all sorts of reasons. There's been other schemes to bring water over from the Pecos Basin into the Middle Rio Grande. We opposed those as well. I don't think there's easy sources of water outside of this basin. It doesn't mean that we might not find some way to bring some additional amount of water in from another basin, but I think it's going to be a small marginal amount akin to what we might be able to bring in from brackish. And those are just my sort of guesses as to what we should expect. I can't say for certain, but if there is easy water to be had in some of these other basins, some would be using it already. I mean, the Pecos needs water there just as much as we need moderate water on the Middle Rio Grande. One basin I haven't talked a lot about tonight is the Colorado River Basin, of which New Mexico is a part, through the San Juan River. We're embarking on a very similar path on the Colorado River, and that's one, again, I could have put on my slide where it says, we've gotten some agreements in the past without litigation. We reached a stopgap, I'd say, agreement among all the basin states 20 years ago on the Colorado River about how to operate in times of drought. We now recognize that was a woefully inadequate set of guidelines, and the basin states and reclamation are currently in negotiation for replacements that would be it would require significantly greater sacrifices from the states based on worsening hydrology. We don't know where those discussions are going to go, but what I can say is those states have managed since the 1960s to stay out of major litigation and try to find resolutions. Again, I don't know. It doesn't mean that they've always kept their water uses within where they should. I think anybody who has seen the water use in Phoenix can attest to the rampant overuse there. But the point is, we're at a place where we're talking about how we can make the cuts needed to keep the Colorado River system going without us being in a lawsuit where the parties have just spent all the time fighting rather than trying to find solutions. So I'm optimistic that in the Middle Rio Grande we can act more like adults than sort of parties that are fighting to try to get solutions before it's too late. But again, if the next 7 years are like the last 7 years, we'll have run out of time. So that's it. That's my presentation. And at this point, I haven't been able to see the chat at all. I'm sure that people have been, well, I'm not sure. We'll see, asking questions, but I'm going to end my slideshow and yeah, happy to answer any questions that folks have. Yes, there are some questions that have been posted.
And there's a few more too that I will read, but I think let's go ahead and get Bob Wesley's question here to get things started. And Yeah, perfect, Nat. I was just going to ask you to stop sharing so we could see you a little bit bigger for some of your answers. What will we do during the next 7.5 months to avoid crossing the 200K threshold this year into that compact violation?
So thank you, Brittany and Bob, for the question. So we are tracking on a weekly basis what's coming in at Otoe and what's going to Elephant Butte. Um, there is there it was a really bad April, like really bad. March, up through March, we were pretty much meeting our compact obligations. April, of course, is usually bad. It's, MRGCD is recharging its system, so you have a lot of water going into soils in the Middle Rio Grande. But we released something like, there's something like 40,000 acre feet that flowed past Otoe in April, and something like 5,000 acre feet got to, I'm sorry, the obligation was something like, well, I'm not going to give you the number, sorry, because I'm going to get it wrong. I don't remember if our obligation to deliver for that month was 40,000 or if the total flows were 40,000. But the bottom line is we had a bad April, and we were expecting a bad April. What I think, Bob, we're doing again on a monthly basis, MRGCD is going to have a significantly shorter irrigation season than normal. We've already been in significant talks with them and the Bureau of Reclamation about sort of ensuring that their operations are not going to be needlessly harmful for the compact. And if, we'll see how May is going. If we're not, if things don't start turning around in June, I think we're going to have a much more intense conversation about what we can do to route water to Elephant Butte. I will say I don't expect we're gonna be getting to the 200,000 this year. That would, I mean, it's theoretically possible, but given how little Otoe inflows there were, there's only so much water we have to deliver to Elephant Butte. So recall I put up on that slide, we have, an increased amount of water needing to deliver based on how much flowed past Otoe. We had such rotten, snowpack up in the San Juans that we have to deliver significantly less. If we get a halfway decent monsoon that, we're getting water into the river, we probably aren't in sort of emergency mode this year, but we're watching it really closely. I'll put it that way. Where it's a scary year, and it's one that we're watching it month by month.
Thanks, Nat. It'll be interesting to see how the monsoons affect that also. I know that you were saying, and you and I were talking before the presentation, that it looks like some of the new weather reports are showing hopefully a wetter monsoon season than was earlier predicted. And so I'm curious to see how that'll play out in the long run for 2025. So you mentioned that you're starting to do some pre-enforcement prior to the adjudication to try to get some of the pieces managed, including issuing a metering order for some of the wells, not the domestic wells, but irrigation and industrial wells, I'm assuming commercial. And that you have a contractor looking for the number of those wells so you can give notice. Do you have an estimate of the number of parties at all for that?
No, I don't yet. I ask people, and it's really, people are just giving wild guesses.
Mhm.
There's, and I say, okay, well, do we have a list of the wells? And they say, well, you look here and then you look here, and then if you, sort here, you might get a pretty good list. It's like, no, I need to know every single well. I want it their priority date, I want their purpose of use, and I want their quantity. And we can't administer without all that.
Right.
And so, we can kind of go around and like find some stuff in a lot of places, but then we're not sure how many pre-basin wells there are. Now we have better tools than we've had in the past to find those, right? We can look at aerial imagery and we know when MRGCD has been delivering, and MRGCD looks at these things too. So we're going to be talking to them, and I think we're going to be able to find the irrigation wells pretty easily based on that. If your fields are still green when you're not getting surface water, that's a sign, right? But uh, it'll probably require a little bit more sort of hunting around for some of the smaller, water system wells and getting all that sorted out. I don't, but I don't want to give you a number because I, I feel like I need, I need to know that number down to an extremely fine level of accuracy. And right now it's educated guesses is all there are.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious on the same vein, in terms of, not requiring domestic wells to be irrigated. I know that oftentimes domestic wells are considered a de minimis use. Just anecdotally, I cannot tell you the number of people I've talked to in MRGCD who say, oh, we're going to get our water cut off by June this year. I'm just going to drill domestic well and use it to irrigate. And these are, the little tiny irrigators who are irrigating their landscape and not big agricultural MRGCD users. These are the urban, households watering trees and lawns and stuff. And so I'm just curious if like some of the agreements that you're talking about with MRGCD and ABCWA, would they be interested in doing a, moratorium on domestic wells within their service area like Bernalillo does or Santa Fe does, to stop people from drilling new domestic wells for new use on their property?
Yeah, there we have had conversations in Bernalillo County they have a pretty aggressive sort of well regulatory system that they're putting into place. And so local government entities do have power to sort of do these types of moratoriums. And I think that those are all extremely, you know, those types of solutions are certainly on the table. I think that the anecdotal evidence of sort of like people irrigating from domestic wells, it's a real issue, even if it's not a real issue, because if people think that everybody is taking a ton of water from domestic wells, it's going to make them less interested in actually giving up something.
Right.
The Amit litigation, the Huake Nambe Tasuke Basin adjudication, the big issue that was litigated over for a long time there, aside from the quantification of the Pueblo wells, was the effect of domestic wells on Pueblo water supplies. The Pueblos obtained from federal court a moratorium, so it was an injunction, preventing additional domestic wells in the early 1980s. The moratorium was eventually modified, but we were getting very wildly different estimates at that time of how much those domestic wells were impacting surface water supplies. And so we actually did a study. I think that's probably the best quality data on domestic well use that I'm aware of in New Mexico. And the amount of water that was actually being used out of domestic wells was quite a bit lower than anybody had anticipated. It was under half an acre foot per well. And these include people with gardens, with trees, with, these things. Now, I'm not saying that somebody in Valencia County isn't using more, but it was a sort of an eye opener, and it helped us actually feel more comfortable in limiting more the amount of water we're allowed anybody under a domestic well. So we used to let people use 3 acre feet. Now, we've cut that back to 1 acre foot. But again, once you get a shared technical understanding of what the problem is, then you can move forward towards a solution. The Pueblos still and the other parties insisted on metering all domestic wells as part of the Amit settlement. So that's a requirement of that settlement. And I'll tell you, it's a huge pain in the neck to get every single person who has a house that has a domestic well metered. And it takes, I think, staff time away from probably, bigger bang for the buck problems. So that's why I'm not enthusiastic about putting meters on all of them. But in terms of talking moratoriums, in terms of targeted analysis and study to sort of quantify the scale of the problem, I am all for it. And we are right now doing some things to try to study and bound the amount of depletions from domestic wells in the Middle Rio Grande. but I don't think that, yeah, like from what I've seen right now, I'm not advocating for slapping meters on all of them, but it's not like I like tons of domestic wells and people being able to irrigate from them whenever, they feel like it. Those are not good things.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. And I agree, getting those domestic wells metered is arduous, and then following up with meter readings is unbearable for the staff to be able to manage. We've got a couple new questions in the chat. Can the OSC ISC maintain that ongoing compact monitoring visible to the public as the year progresses?
So thank you, Bob. That's I'm glad you asked the question. The answer is I'm not sure. And the reason why is that's pretty provisional data. And like, I'm not real comfortable with like Texas saying, well, wait, here's your, we have a whole process to reconcile our compact accounting that we follow and we adhere to. I would check with our Rio Grande Bureau at the ISC about how comfortable we feel about those monthly numbers going out to the world. We have on the ISC Rio Grande Basin website a pretty robust compact accounting set of data and information. So I encourage people to go to the ISC's Rio Grande Compact website and check out accounting and annual accounting tables and there's a lot of data there, but usually the best quality data is when we do the reconciliation at the end of the year. And so I'm not sure how much we'd feel comfortable, but it's a fair question, and I am fine, taking it back to the folks who manage that accounting. And thank you, Brittany, for sharing that link. And actually, that's a.
Oh, is that not the one?
Well, it's that one I think will, for whatever silly reason, take you just to the agenda for our annual meeting. And but under the compact, if you see the tab accounting, that's the better. So there would just be like a / compact accounting before the .php.
I'll take a minute to get you that link. Just a second, guys. In the meantime, let's move on to Norm's question. The governor approved a $500,000 recurring budget increase for the OSC to address water overuse and compact compliance matters in the Middle Rio Grande. The legislature cut that. Is the state engineer adjusting assignments and new and existing staff to focus on preventing violation given those cuts?
And the answer is yes, we are. It might mean that we spend a little bit more time on some of our permit applications than we otherwise would. We also did receive some temporary funding. So I received a special appropriation for to further adjudications along. And so I'm using that funding to look at the sort of the universe of wells part of the problem. If we'd gotten our appropriation, we could probably use some of that, the appropriation you refer to, use some of that for this, but using contractors to look at the wells so that will help us move forward on a metering order. But we're going to be pulling people off of other things to be working on, metering order and convening major water users to start discussing what do we do if we're getting close to a compact violation. Yeah, I don't think it's the sort of thing that that we're going to not be able to fulfill any of our other duties, but our current legislative performance measure for the Office of the State Engineer, the big one for our water rights, is effectively how many permits we're processing. Right? It's our permit backlog. We can let that slide a little bit more if we need to reassign some folks to working on enforcement.
Along those lines, Nat, may I follow up with a question on that? I believe that many of the Office of the State Engineer and the State Engineer performance measures that the legislature has put in place really only measure effort instead of outcomes. And some of that effort is really not even well measured, like the number of permits. Is the state engineer thinking about proposing meaningful outcome performance measures for the legislature to judge so that they know what targets you're shooting for?
So we're constantly working on sort of how do we improve our performance measures. I think one of the tricky ones, so actually for the Interstate Stream Commission, some of our performance measures are our compact performance. So that is a performance measure. But we're sort of scratching our heads at that, it might be kind of more dependent on hydrology than anything else on some of our compacts. And is that sort of something that the legislature should decide on whether to fund us? Performance measures are a real mixed bag. And I don't know if people are familiar with Goodhart's law, which basically states when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure because you start managing to game that target. I'm not saying we're gaming things, but it motivates people in ways that probably weren't intended when the target was created. So I will say that for my program, the litigation and adjudication program, we have been modifying the performance measures. And what I like to focus on there is successful outcomes, how many successful outcomes we've reached, mixed with descriptive measures instead of performance targets of how busy are we. So tell them how busy we are, but then have our performance measures be focused on how many partial final judgment decrees we've achieved in adjudications, for example. So those are, I think it's a fair point. I think a number of our performance measures are open for reevaluation.
Thank you, Nat. And I have a couple other questions. Let me ask one of them now, and then we'll see who else has questions. I'm concerned that in the Middle Rio Grande, there have been too many surface water rights that have been transferred into wells. Wells never suffer a shortage. They can pump a full supply, regardless of the situation with the river, and I believe that there are some, for example, surface water rights from Terrace Canyon that are now in wells when we no longer have any flow into Harris Canyon, and we couldn't have because of all the other uses upstream, domestic wells and everything else. The point is that some people are not affected by the surface water shortages and others are affected acutely. And I think that was on the former state engineer's agenda to do something about modified conjunctive use to so that everybody shares in the pain. And I think that's necessary to get the large urban population in the Middle Rio Grande to really pay attention. Do you have
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm just writing down kind of some of the thoughts. So did you have anything else you wanted to
No.
add on? It's a great point, and it's a point that I think we're not, so to be clear, we should, and our current policies no longer allow the transfer of surface rights that don't have reliable flows into groundwater wells. So that was not always our policy. And we do have, as Norm stated, the issue where some folks who would have no longer been able to use surface water are now able to use groundwater, and they're affecting the same hit on the system. We absolutely are going to need to have a shared reduction in depletions. It can't just be, oh, well, there's no more surface water, and then the groundwater pumpers can continue to do whatever they can, depending on how deep their well is. I think that that's one of the reasons I really like what they're doing in Curry County. It's sort of voluntarily bringing well owners in and avoiding them to sort of race to the bottom in their collective action problem. So yes, I do think that that's certainly on the table. And
Okay,
it looks like,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
We have a question from Manuel. Is the National Forest Service involved in any of these initiatives, especially in special use applications relative to water sources?
So, and I'm going to have to apologize, Manuel. I'm not so the short answer is, with the Middle Rio Grande, we have not been engaged to nearly the same degree with the Forest Service as we have with other federal entities that, the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service. Corps of Engineers. And I'm not familiar with the special use applications that it sounds like you've seen and are interested in. I'm happy to sort of follow up, but I don't. The answer is they're not as part of this conversation. I'm not sure what the size of these special use applications would be. My guess is they might be on the smaller side, but yeah, my answer is I don't know.
I have another quick question for you, Nat. Does the Intrepid v. New Mexico case give the state engineer the foundation to do some enforcement on abandonment prior to the adjudication? And is that a plan to start implementing more enforcement in the abandonment area to kind of bring in line paper permits with wet water?
So yes. Just so people are aware of that case, so Intrepid Potash is a potash mining company in southeast New Mexico. Southeast New Mexico has one of the biggest potash reserves in the world. Potash basically meaning potassium salts, which are an essential ingredient of fertilizer. And they got a very large quantity of water rights for their refining process back in the 1930s. And then their refinery became obsolete by the 1970s. They dismantled the refinery, never used the water rights associated with that refinery since the 1970s. And then in the 2010s, when they saw an oil boom all around them, wanted to revive their water rights and sell many thousands of acre feet of water to oil and gas. And the Office of the State Engineer initially gave them temporary permits allowing them to do that. The Interstate Stream Commission, which is sort of the guardian of our sort of compact obligations, opposed those and ultimately kind of turned the Office of the State Engineer's opinion. And both the OSC and the ISC sought an abandonment of the unused water rights. And they prevailed. We prevailed in district court and in the Court of Appeals. We're currently awaiting a Supreme Court decision. It should come out pretty soon. Based on the oral argument, I'm very confident the Supreme Court will uphold the finding of abandonment. And so the answer is yes, it gives us hopefully a clear, workable avenue to find that water rights are abandoned. The topic of forfeiture or abandonment of water rights is a interesting big topic that frankly we can have a whole other presentation on. We're not like roving around trying to abandon as many water rights as possible. They become a real problem when people start trying to revive them for uses. And you hope that usually they have to go through a permitting process at that point and we can catch it at that point. But there are some times where we catch wind and we see that abandoned water rights might be brought back to use. And so we actually have a few cases around the state now in the aftermath of Intrepid where we are proactively bringing abandonment action saying, well, we think that, for example, for cannabis, there's a lot of people who are looking for water rights for commercial purposes for cannabis grow operations. And somebody says, oh, I got a water right I'm not using. Well, yeah, you're not using because you haven't ever used it, and so we catch wind of that and we bring an abandonment action to try and stop those types of those types of things from happening. So I wouldn't say that the use of abandonment or forfeiture is kind of a central plank of what we're going to be doing in the Middle Rio Grande for sure. But it's part of our duties to enforce water rights. If people can revive old, defunct water rights, they're going to be taking that water from people who've been following the rules and using water consistently, and that's to me not the way it should be. If somebody doesn't have a use for a water right anymore, there's smoother ways to wind it down than just sort of sit on it and speculate and then try and revive it in the future.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any last minute questions before we do some of our closing slides? Thank you so much for your presentation today, Nat. It was very informative and fascinating. I'm very curious and interested to see how things move forward, both with compact and the adjudication, and kind of the combination of how those two may bring more, maybe some smoothness to that graph. We'll see.
I hope so.
But again, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We appreciate the time you've taken. And I've just got a few closing remarks for you all, if you'll give me a second to get my PowerPoint up. As always, we have a do your part. We are still looking for volunteers as the water advocates. We need a secretary. If anyone is good at taking notes, we would love to have you come to our board meetings to take those minutes for us. We also are always looking for anyone who's interested in submitting an article for our newsletter. It doesn't need to be a technical newsletter. It could just simply be about how you interface with water in your world. I think those perspectives are something that we really need to highlight a lot more. We do tend to be a lot on the technical side with our newsletter. And so if you're interested in writing something a little bit less technical for us, please reach out. You can send an email to info@nmwateradvocates.org if you would like to submit an article or if you'd like to volunteer for our secretary position. We also have a new speakers bureau. We're going to be doing some presentations that are more on water basics. As I said, with our newsletter, we've been quite technical, and I think that's the case with a lot of our speaker series. So we've decided to do some water basics presentations that we're going to be taking out to the community. If you know of a community organization that would like to learn about water, please let us know, and we would be more than happy to schedule a presentation to that community. I also wanted to invite you to attend the San Isidro y Maria de la Cabeza celebration in the South Valley this coming Sunday on the 18th. This is a celebration of the patron saint of farming, and it's a lovely celebration with many different types of prayers and music, and the whole acequia is filled with petals. The request is to bring flower petals with you if you come. The meeting is at Arnal and sorry, I need to get my notes up to tell you exactly where the meeting location is. Arnal and Isleta. And there'll be a procession from there to a historic farm where the acequia will be filled with petals, as I said, and that will be followed by a simple farm lunch. So if you're in the South Valley on Sunday, we would love to have you at that. There will also be some phenomenal Aztec dancers at that event. It's a very special and lively thing, so we hope that you can attend that. And our next workshop will be on June 19th, and we are featuring Maurice Hall, who is going to be presenting on groundwater as essential infrastructure. So check your inboxes near the 1st of June, around the first week of June, and you'll get the flyer and the link to register for that meeting. We hope that you can attend in June. If you can't, don't forget to register anyway. And if you register, you'll get the recording and the slides from that presentation. So as I said, we had June 19th is groundwater as essential infrastructure. Our July 17th, we're going to have Eric Olivas, and I believe Frank Baca has also committed to joining us. That presentation will be on a vision for a resilient Rio Grande. And then we do have some open slots that we're filling for the remaining part of the summer and fall. We've got lots of requests out for speakers, but nothing committed yet. So if you have any specific speaker or topic that you would like to recommend, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We definitely want to give you presentations that you're interested in. And if there's been something that we're lacking or not thinking of, we definitely want to hear from you about that. We are so grateful to our co-sponsors for supporting this workshop. We are not able to do it without your support. the New Mexico Water Dialogue. I hope everyone had a good time at the dialogue meeting today. And if you were there and you joined us this evening, thank you for a very long day of water information. We appreciate you attending both. Amigos Bravos, 350 New Mexico, Interfaith Power and Light, and the League of Women Voters. Again, thank you to our co-sponsors. And thank you to all of you for being here tonight. If this is something that you appreciate, we would always appreciate your volunteer time, or if you're able to make a donation, we would never say no to that. I'm going to pop the donation link into the chat now. And again, thank you for spending your evening with us. We hope to see you in June. And that we will be planning on posting the slides and the recording from this presentation early next week. You will get an email when it's been posted. Thank you again for your time.
And Nat, I just want to say thank you so much for everything you're doing. I know that you and a lot of other people are putting in really long hours representing the state of New Mexico and trying to do essential work for us all. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Water can't wait. So we're doing what we can.
Good evening.
Good evening, all.